For a while now, I've been suggesting that I was going to make a video about our friends the Code Monkeys and one of their more video gamey games. The Code Monkeys are responsible for taking those Dingo movies and burning them onto a disc before releasing them onto the mass public. Yeah, those fuckers.
There are two games that I know of that interest me: The Simpsons Skateboarding and Shrek Treasure Hunt. I opted for Shrek since I finally got my recording software to work on PS1 and would like to celebrate with a PS1 review.
I didn't have much experience with PS1 because, well, I kind of missed that period because I was quite young at the time, and as a result I didn't really get into the games. The PS2 did have some form of backwards compatibility, but it was sketchy at best, and well, if you actually got a slim version of the PS2, the memory card wouldn't fit anymore, and as a result you couldn't save your progress. I only had 3 PS1 games, and only one of them I actually kept the original copy of. The other 2 I sold to Loz at some point.
The Code Monkeys made a number of titles, mostly for early Sega systems like the Genesis and Master System. They're considered veterinary developers as they've existed since the 80s. In spite of this, finding any information on them is as hard as Duke Nukem's balls of steel, because they've become a John Doe developer at this point, meaning that most websites that have games and don't know exactly who to credit them for usually end up crediting the Code Monkeys. One of the games that they're credited towards the making of is The Golden Compass on the PlayStation 2, which is a game I'm quite familiar with as I got it for Christmas as a kid and spent quite a bit of time on it. Not only does the Code Monkeys name not appear at any point during the game's opening or its legal text, but it's also absent from the back of the box and the manual. I don't know why this is the case. I think it could be the case that the Code Monkeys worked on it under a different company name, or applying their personal expertise to the game, but I think the most likely case is that these websites are getting it wrong. But looking at this game, I believe their involvement, if there was any involvement at all, was minor at best. It's too well made for the people who made Shrek Treasure Hunt.
You'll see what I mean in a minute.
Another thing that's weird about this game...
Oh yeah, you bet your ass is more.
...is that the game came out in 2002, 1 year after Shrek hit the big screens, making it not exactly a tie-in game, but it was still the first Shrek game to hit the PlayStation 1. I actually went years believing that it was the only game related to Shrek 1 that was released on consoles, but recent research has eluded me to the actual movie tie-in game, which in all honesty I didn't know existed until now. Granted, this wasn't unusual to have the PS1 version be different than all the others. Like, Lilo and Stitch, for example, was on the PS1 a Crash Bandicoot platformer, and on the PS2 it was Stitch Experiment 626, which was a weird sort of shoot-'em-up thing. However, I couldn't find a PS2 counterpart to this game, or a PS2 Shrek 1 game, so it did cause quite a bit of confusion even with all this info on the games. It was understandable at the time to make the PS1 version vastly different to the PS2 based on its own strengths. After all, the PS2 was light years ahead in its limitations. It wasn't like the PS3 and the PS4 where for a few years you actually got the same games on both systems but one looked a bit shittier than the other. It was actually the case that characters like Errol from Jak 3 were made of more polygons than you'd find in the entirety of a PlayStation 1 game. Another company, DICE Sweden, were originally supposed to work on this thing, but DICE ditched the project pretty early on and worked on Shrek for the Xbox, probably seeing more potential in Xbox development at the time. DICE are also known for making a rather obscure war series known as Battlefield. I don't know if anyone's heard of that one, I had to look it up. And they've also worked on the more recent Star Wars Battlefront titles, you know, the two that everyone hates. I do love the fact that the people who made Battlefield also made a Shrek game. I just can't help but smirk at that fact. One thing that's interesting to note is that the US release of this game was November 2001, and it took the Code Monkeys another year before they could release their crap game, by which point Shrek Extra Large was released, just to undermine the competition, as they knew that the Code Monkeys would likely blow them out of the water. It's basically the same game, Shrek Extra Large, but ported to the GameCube with a few new features. You see, apparently DICE were under some difficult time constraints, which is why the Xbox version of Shrek sucked, and though they did add a new storyline where you save Princess Fiona from Merlin the Wizard, who, weirdly enough, appeared in Shrek 3 as a completely different character, the haphazard GameCube re-release still managed to suck balls. Shit. Why didn't I cover this game instead? Oh well, fuck it. I've already played Shrek Treasure Hunt, so I might as well cover it now. One thing that I found kind of funny is that one of the magazines that I read as a kid actually said that they never got a review copy of this, and it was a very rare occurrence that they didn't, given that they were the official PlayStation 1 magazine. As a result, they either didn't get one when the game was crap, or if the developer was just being a bit of an asshat. Turns out that the crap thing was most likely the case. So, the game opens up on this title card, which honestly makes me laugh. This was used quite a bit, as it appears on the back of the extra large box as well. Anyone who has seen the movie as much as I have will know that this is the scene where Shrek is arguing with Donkey, and ends the argument by saying, "Bye bye, see you later," in a sarcastic manner. And this was the image that they opted to use for the promotional material, to try and make it look like he's reaching out for a key. I also find the small copyright notice kind of funny, as it says that Shrek and Fiona are owned by DreamWorks, as well as Shrek's ears, which are also copyrighted.
Honestly, at this point, I couldn't tell you if the word cocky or Shrek's ears are the stupidest thing I've ever seen copyrighted.
So, the game starts off like the movie does, with this book being read, explaining the situation. I don't know who this narrator is, or who they're meant to be. I think the Code Monkeys just ran up to her in the street with a microphone, and pointed a gun at her, and told her to read the lines.
Shrek is planning a special picnic for Princess Fiona, but all the picnic items have gone missing. The items must be in the swamp somewhere. Use the swamp map to help Shrek locate and collect them all before Princess Fiona arrives.
It would explain why she's so uninfused whilst doing so. I actually found a cover online that looks like this artwork in the game, but I've personally never seen it in real life. All of the versions that I've ever seen look like the 3D modelled characters, with a slightly stenciled look to them. You'll probably notice that Princess Fiona is a human on the cover, and in the game, in spite of the fact that she doesn't meet Shrek until about a third into the first movie, and by the end of the movie she isn't a human anymore, which means that this game doesn't take place in any known Shrek universe. My guess is that due to the game being made between Shreks 1 and 2, DreamWorks didn't want the Ogre Fiona to be shown on the front cover, as it might be classed as a spoiler for the original Shrek movie, despite the fact that they showed her on Shrek 2 2 years after. If this is set in the Shrek universe, I don't know when it's supposed to take place. Like, is this before, during, or after Shrek 1? There's no answer. And this is one of the things that makes me think that the people who made this game didn't see the movie. Only 3 characters appear in it. There's no Donkey or Farquaad in this thing. The third character who appears are the 3 blind mice, who have apparently stolen all of Shrek's shit. And yes, I am counting them as one character, because they basically are one character. Anyway, as a result of the little blind bastard's theft, he's had to go on an adventure to find all of the materials, as the back of the box calls them.
Or he could crush them in his giant ogre hands until he'd tell him where they put his shit.
I noticed that the noise that plays when you press something is the same as those damn Dingo Pictures movie menus, which fills me with a sense of dread. and the game begins to show us So, yes, this is the game. Really. It's not something I put together as a joke. This is actually what was sold to people. I have to say though that the environments aren't so bad for a PS1 game. The backgrounds look pretty decently put together. However, the sound design is fucking awful, as this game never shuts the fuck up. I've never, in all my life, muted a game on my TV quicker than this one. Yeah, I played this thing in fucking silence, as after 5 minutes of exposure to it, it gave me a headache. It's just constant noise over and over again. I mean, you've got the music, which I swear I've heard before but couldn't even begin to think of where. It's littered with stock sound effects that play out of sync with the rest of the world, and everything you touch or do makes a noise in this god-awful game. It's just a sensory overload. So I found a rabbit on a pogo stick and went after it, seeing if it did anything, and I was hit and bounced off. Yeah, that's what it does. It just knocks you on your ass. In case you couldn't figure it out, and I'm not being condescending, I seriously won't blame anyone for not getting this, but these are enemies in the game. However, they have absolutely no pathfinding, and just do whatever, hopping around and waddling and charging randomly at random intervals as they navigate their predetermined path. Never once did they chase Shrek during my playthrough or directly attack him, and you can more or less just play live and let live with them. This is the biggest threat that this game has to offer, and the worst they can do is knock you on your ass for a few seconds and make you wait to get back up. Oh, the horror. I get the feeling that they were designed to be implemented as real enemies, but then they remembered that they couldn't program AI for shit and just decided, fuck it, and put them in anyway without any real programming behind them. This is one of the reasons I don't believe they could have ever made a game like the Golden Compass, even if they tried their hardest. I'm not saying anything about that game and its quality through this statement, but you can't deny that it looks and plays better than this and Simpsons Skateboarding. I also want to point out how fucking generic the enemies are. Like, you'd expect something kind of tongue-in-cheek and funny like in Shrek, something to mock fairy tales, like them frogs that turn into princes in Crash Bandicoot, but no, nothing of the sort, just generic rabbits, generic warthogs, generic crocodiles. I also found that if you hold some buttons, it makes Shrek do this walk. It makes him look like that one confident swagger zombie from Unknown City, or that dude from Birdemic 2's opening sequence. I don't get the point in it. It's not like there's any scenes where you actually have to navigate carefully around anything. So, what do you actually do in this game? Well, you actually just run around and pick shit up. Yeah, it's another picking shit up off the floor games. Why do I play so many of those? Anyway, in this one, you actually get something. You unlock a mini game, depending on what you pick up. It honestly reminds me of Bugs and Taz Time Busters, in that regard anyway. It has a similar structure where carrots are like a currency, and you need to collect the carrots to access certain areas. However, in that game, there is some challenge in getting some of the carrots, since you actually have to solve some well-made puzzles to earn some, and you can risk losing them by getting hurt. Here though, you just run around and pick random items up as you go, and I only found 1 or 2 that were locked away behind some form of puzzle, and I couldn't be arsed solving the puzzle, as there was no incentive whatsoever to waste my time cracking a puzzle when the world around me isn't generating the intrigue to make me. I honestly don't think that puzzles are a good idea in a game where nobody's ever going to give a shit about its universe. Puzzles tend to be like blocks, dead ends. And if you hit a dead end on a journey and you don't care about getting to the end, you're just going to turn around and go home. Each area has a different treasure that you need to unlock the area's minigame. And no, there's no reason why the minigame can't be accessed from the beginning. It's arbitrary as fuck and exists purely to pad the runtime out. Really, why can't I just access the minigames right away other than that stupid cynical rule? Sure, it would make this environment pointless, but you could have saved quite a bit of time and effort by removing this pointless element from the game and just have it so you select minigames on a list, or went to them directly in this mode. And it would have been easier to beat the game, it would have been a quicker game to beat, and it's not like its artificial length improves it in any way. I also have to ask, what the hell has Shrek become? He looks... ew! I mean, seriously, those assholes who tried to turn him into a meme, they spent years trying to make him terrifying, and honestly, the Code Monkeys managed it in 5 seconds. Oh well, no time for that now. The first minigame is starting. Swinging on chains.
What the fuck is this? Ico now?
Well, it's not far off, as you have to swing and climb around a castle. It's like that bit in the film. So we get some different music as we hop through the castle, and we are treated to this fucking awful platforming segment. I kept dying in the lava for a number of reasons, the first being that the jump button doesn't always work. I am willing to chalk this up to my controller being on its way out, but in all honesty, I'm not 100% sure that's the issue or the only issue. The jumping is awful regardless. It's like Unknown City in terms of how rigid it feels, and you sort of just flop into the air. I also really hate the leap of faith gameplay in this shit as well. Every now and then, you have to guess if the platform beneath you is actually a platform or a pit. Sometimes it's a 50-50 chance as it's a moving or a retracting platform, and yeah, you can't see it, so it's just a shitty guess as to whether or not you're going to connect with it or not when you fall. One of these chains is placed here, and it serves no purpose. It just exists to waste your fucking time. And I do mean that literally, because there's a time limit on this shit. Mind you, something existing just to waste your fucking time is the perfect metaphor for this entire fucking game. Also, the music never shuts the fuck up, except for this one tiny moment of bliss, where it stops between the endless repeat of the midis and you remember what silence and clarity actually felt like. Right up until it starts up again and you remember that you're in hell.
Honestly, I've played a lot of PS1 games where this is an issue, and in all honesty, it's one of the worst things about the PS1 era. I've never played a game that's so auditorily terrible that I've had to mute it in my entire life. Yeah, this game is that awful to sit through.
I'd also like to add that there's no voice acting in this fucking thing. Well, apart from that one narrator in the opening, but there's nothing by way of dialogue. Shrek has no lines, nor do the mice, or any of the characters. In fact, nobody else appears in this entire fucking game. Nobody vocalizes in this thing, making it feel like some sort of ROM hack for another game where someone just put a reskin on the character to make it look like Shrek. Anyway, I unfortunately ran out of time on this shitty ass fucking stage, and I've never given less of a fuck about anything in my entire life. I mean, why would I? Really? Because I'm pretty sure that screen should have Shrek walking into the Code Monkeys head office and getting a handshake from the CEO, greeting him as their newest employee and making him work on the Shrek treasure hunt project for that scene. The next minigame that I unlocked was the cotton candy minigame, where Shrek has to swing at these passing flies with a big wad of spider's web. There's no skill to it. You just have to move these orbs close to the flies and the game tells you when you can swing and you'll catch said fly. There's no penalty for missing and you can just swing around like a madman as a result. If you want. Hell, I did for the last one. I mean, why not? The worst that could happen is I miss, the best that could happen is I catch it by accident. Anyway, to celebrate, Shrek murders a snake. I also love his eyes in this scene. Like, what the actual fuck is he even meant to be? The third minigame is to catch the 3 blind mice. You should probably torture them whilst having hold of them, but nah. Now, instead of having those funny accents in this game, they just squeak. Because voice acting is hard. Seriously, these guys got the entire cast of The Simpsons to record their voice into tinfoil to voice the characters of The Simpsons skateboarding, so why couldn't they have gotten someone to pretend to be Shrek and the mice? Oh, they might have to do some sound editing there, and that would have been bad. I should point out that between each minigame, I ran around this stupid pointless map for about 10 minutes at a time, and no, it wasn't worth it. And by this point, I'd more or less given up and said fuck this game. This game sucks the earwax out of Shrek's heavily copyrighted spoon ears. It's visually overwhelming to look at due to the abundance of colours and effects, the sheer magnitude of which overwhelm your eyes. And despite the fact that it has some nice textures, the game manages to look ugly as fuck due to it having the grossest colour palette I've ever seen. I know that it's set in Shrek's swamp, but it truly doesn't make it any more pleasant to look at knowing that. Knowing that it's meant to look shitty doesn't make it not look shitty. Audibly, it is just noise, with the occasional oasis of silence. Again, the soundtrack itself isn't all that bad, but it's so loud and overbearing and constant that it just gets grating after a while. It would honestly be better if some areas had more low-key soundtracks, like that Walden and the Wolf game, or even went completely silent at times and just played ambient swamp noises. These jaunty tunes should have really been saved for the minigames. Just the minigames, and not inflicted on us at the rest of the time. The few sound effects that it has are recycled from other Code Monkeys games, or incredibly stock to the point that they might as well have been. It has no voice acting or story to keep you invested or interested, which is what the Shrek movies were about. Most of the original Shrek is just banter, and the pop culture references and shit are basically everywhere to distract you from the fact that the story itself is kind of generic. Again, I feel like the people who made this maybe saw a trailer or 2 or 3 promotional images for the film and made it up as they went along based on those few things. Gameplay switches between non-existent and boring to existent but not very good. The first minigame I played was a headache, and the other 2 were doable but not exactly fun or anything. Hell, it's so bad that my favourite PlayStation magazine at the time gave it a 3 out of 10 and then proceeded to sentence it to death in a later page, in their Justice feature, where a bunch of football hooligans stomped it to death in the street.
Good! Justice! Wait, did I subconsciously steal that from the magazine? Fuck!
Needless to say that this thing came out around the time that PlayStation 1 was on its way out. The more competent developers didn't want anything to do with this thing, and left it to go and work on a next-gen piece of shit instead.
Honestly, you can tell that the people who thought it was tragic that they went out of business hadn't played any of their games since the mid-90s, because in all honesty, I think it should have happened a decade sooner, if this was what they were going to produce.
Seriously, if you're in the industry for 20 years, and this fucking turd and these fucking shitlets are all you can say for it, then you don't deserve to stay in business. End of story.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go out, find some football hooligans, and join them in giving this game the beatdown that it truly deserves. Actually, no, that's stupid. I'll just put it on the shelf and forget it even exists.